So, again, welcome. My name is Matthew. I'm the lead pastor here. Welcome to everybody on Zoom. Thanks so much for joining us. And today, our focus is to celebrate, honor, and thank Wesley Bolden, one of our pastors who's going to be leaving to start a new role. He will talk a little bit about that in a moment. Not too far from here in Gaithersburg, in a week or so. I'm going to invite Wesley up. We're going to have a little chat this morning, just sort of talk a little bit about the role, talk about his journey, some of his time here. So let's give him a really big, warm welcome.
Well, good morning.
So you just got back, you've been away on study leave this past week, right? So up in New Jersey. So how was that?
It was good. I mean, my brain is really full with a lot of information, and I don't know if anybody else's brain is like mine, but when mine is full, sometimes it doesn't work quite right. So this
is going to be a great interview, then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Almost like a truth serum. Hey, let me tell you about this guy. No.
We'll save that till later.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and you were. Now you're studying at Boston, but you went up to Princeton this week for
Yep. Yeah, so, it's kind of a long story, but not a long story, but so I did a degree at Princeton years ago. As a graduate, you can actually check out up to 50 books. I think it's the largest theological library in the country. So,
wow. Good place to go study.
And to get a carload of books.
Yeah. And you didn't have much snow, apparently, right up there. Not as much as
it was definitely less snow there than here, which is unusual, right? Because you typically think you go further north and the weather might be colder and snowier, but the snow came straight for this area, apparently.
You avoided it. That's good. Well, we'll come back to your studies in a bit.
For sure.
Just first of all, just tell us a little bit about this role that you're going to, Seneca Creek Community Church in Gaithersburg, not too far away. You have a previous connection there as well. So just tell us a little bit about the role, what you're going to be doing.
Yeah. So Seneca was, so when we first moved here, a little over 3 years ago, I think that was the first church, my wife is my fact checker, nod your head or shake your head if I'm wrong. It was the first church that we visited when we came here. And so we kind of landed there. And of course, as I'm sure many of you who moved and traveled or, you kind of look around for different churches. And so we kind of circled around a little bit. And then we came back there and actually became members there. So we were members there for a couple of years. Although my previous work had me on the road a lot. So I was not actually at church a whole lot. My wife was there more often than I was. So it became real community for us.
Yeah, and you did an internship there, Kim, right? Yeah, so a pretty close connection.
Yeah, she's actually spoken there on Sunday mornings multiple times. I've never spoken there. They've never asked me to speak on Sunday mornings.
They've got that coming. They know what's going to hit them.
Exactly, yeah. And so it had become a real community for us. And so the position, I think you mentioned executive pastor. I know there's probably a little bit of confusion about what is an executive pastor.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's a fairly newer role in churches, and newer as in 20-ish years, I think. And I think churches, or at least it's a newer title in churches. I think some churches had the role. But really it's, in many places, and in many ways, churches just kind of define it however they want to define it, because there's no set definition. But in many cases, it's kind of the person, like if you're thinking about an organizational hierarchy, you would have kind of a lead pastor, and then the executive pastor would be kind of the second chair person that would provide kind of broad oversight and strategy to ensure that the church is actually living into the vision that the church has.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what the role.
And it's a bigger church, right? I mean, a bigger staff.
Yeah. So a lot of times, So that's really it used to be the case that it was really in much larger, like really large churches, like mega churches, had executive pastors. But it's becoming a lot more common. I think more as we realize that pastors, in some sense, are jacks of all trades, but masters of none. But sometimes there's this realization that there's a more specialized skill set that's needed for different areas. Pastors are often, teachers, communicators, visionaries.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's good to have somebody else on staff to help think about how that vision is executed through the church.
Yeah. And you shared last week a little bit about it's a very multicultural church in a very multicultural area, and that's a real passion of yours as well. So that's a very compelling thing for you. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that for sure is like when we moved here. So that's just been in a sense, that's my life's work. If you think of it as life's work, it's been something that I've pursued, kind of multicultural community within the church for the most part my entire ministry. So just a little bit of backstory. So I grew up in Atlanta in the South, a church that was a Baptist church that was deeply connected in the civil rights movement. So kind of I would say black and proud kind of church, so that's kind of my background. And I actually left that church in pursuit of kind of a more multicultural vision. And so that's a church I grew up in. My father's still a member of that church. I think I mentioned it several years. My home church pastor, I think he's 90 years old at that church, and still there. So the pastor that I grew up with. So that church has not changed at all. And there's something special about that, being deeply rooted in that tradition. But I left that church in pursuit of a different vision. So
and you planted a church, right?
Yeah, planted multiple stops along the way, kind of in pursuit of kind of diverse, multicultural community. Planted a multicultural church on the south side of Atlanta. It's been 12 years ago or so ago. I've studied it academically. It's kind of been my heart's kind of passion. And so we moved here and we visited Seneca. One of the things that first stood out to us was how diverse the church is. And some of that has to do with how diverse this area is different than many other areas around the country.
And just as an example, like you quoted something to me about something like 50. It's a church of about 500 people, and there's about 50 different languages.
Almost 50 different languages are spoken within the church, and so it's just truly the level of diversity that they've been able to achieve is truly kind of mind-boggling.
And presumably, for that to be the case, a pretty high immigrant population as well. People for sure. Coming from cultures where they're speaking other languages. Yeah,
speaking other languages. Yeah, because that's another thing. One of the ways that kind of multiculturalism kind of plays out in the life of the church is in music. And I just remember one Sunday morning being there and hearing worship led in 4 different languages. And it wasn't just we're singing this song to, kind of performative, like to represent a different language or culture, but those cultures were actually there in the room. And it was interesting to see like different people kind of light up when they heard a song that maybe they sang growing up or did not expect to sing in their church here in the States. And so that was just a really kind of special, for me, a special experience. But I think more so than, sometimes when we think about diversity, we can think about getting people of different colors in a room. We can think about it through the lens of kind of racial diversity, but I think there's something special, less about this kind of empirical, like what we're physically able to see, but the kind of spiritual formation that happens in those spaces, where more and more in our society, we're becoming less comfortable sitting at tables with people that don't think like us, and oftentimes the different ways we think are shaped by our ethnic and racial backgrounds. And we're becoming more divided. And I think something unique happens in communities with people that are diverse when they're, metaphorically sit at table with one another and they're able to share their background, their story, and the way that shaped their perspective and the way they think about life and the times we live in. I think those kinds of communities are formative. In a unique way.
I think we're obviously certainly not as far down the road as Seneca Creek in that respect in terms of race and ethnicity, but I think we'd all resonate with that we've the most to learn from people who are at least like us, right? In terms of some of the diversity that we have. But coming back to multiculturalism, though, specifically, it's a passion of yours. Obviously, it's a passion for that church community. and this sort of gets it a little bit into your studies. It's also a focus for you and your work at Boston University, right? Your doctorate program. So I'm going to ask about 3 questions at once, but we'll come back to them. So one is, I guess, you've already got 2 master's degrees in theology, right? So why a doctorate? So what sort of provoked that? I know multiculturalism is a big aspect of that. So you've spoken to that, but maybe there's some other things you want to talk about in terms of study. And then there's the person of Howard Thurman, who's become an inspiration to you and a major force in your studies in that doctorate. So just tell us a little bit about that journey, maybe the doctorate first, then perhaps the connection with Thurman and all that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard for me to put into words like why I'm doing a doctorate. I said to my mother the other day, I told her, I said, it was kind of more of a hobby than it is preparation for any kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And my mother essentially told me I needed to get a life and discover what fun looks like. She was like, hobbies are meant to be fun, relaxing, enjoyable. Yeah. She was like, going back to school is not a hobby. But I do think, so I started this program before, and I've said this, I think, to several people who are probably in this room, that I started this program before I came to Cedar Ridge. And I will say that just the way that, I've thought a lot about this, and I don't really have a clear answer, but just the way my brain is wired, my brain needs to be creating. And the work that I was doing prior to coming to Cedar Ridge was more of a networking job. So I worked a region, the Northeast, where I traveled throughout the region, really just networking with pastors, buying them a cup of coffee and lunch, and talking.
Sounds like a good deal.
Yeah. It was enjoyable in some ways, but in other ways, it didn't challenge my brain creatively. Which that may sound strange to some people, and it may not to others. But for me, like I just struggled in that setting, and a lot of times I was just sitting in hotel rooms, and I'm like, I watched more Food Network, and ate more food, because it was on somebody else's dime. I had a travel budget, right? And so, but I needed to challenge myself, and so. Yeah. It was an opportunity, I think, to go back to school, to begin thinking more deeply about some things that I guess I felt the need to think more deeply about.
Yeah.
And so that's what led to the doctoral program. And not really for career advancement. There's no far out, I need to have this degree.
Yeah.
It was just a way to, and I'm wired, there's some people always say I'm not an academic. And by that I mean that I have some friends that sit at home and read academic books for pleasure. I don't do that, but I can do it if I have a kind of a reason or a deadline or some kind of pressure to do that. Yeah. And so I think it kind of put a little bit of structure in my life to kind of help me do some of that work.
So you went to Boston, right? And Thurman spent time at Boston.
Yeah.
Was that a draw? I mean, what happened? What chicken and the egg kind of thing, I guess. I mean, was Boston, was it because of Thurman that you went to Boston, or did you discover Thurman afresh at Boston?
Yeah, so I discovered Thurman, mostly discovered. I mean, I was familiar a little bit with Thurman before going to Boston, but not very. And I get there, and I mean, so it's kind of where he ended his career. Was at Boston University. So the last 12 years of his career was really spent there. And so they have this massive building, the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground, this massive center. But then you just hear you hear about him all the time. Like everywhere you're turning, you're hearing about this Thurman guy. And Thurman's ministry has many facets to it. So he's done a lot of things over the course of his ministry. But one thing that I did not know was that he started the first interracial, interfaith church in America back in 1944. And when I heard that fact, which is it's not the most popular thing about his life, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the thing that it's not the thing that he's as known for. But when I heard that fact, I couldn't believe it. number one.
Yeah.
And then as I started reading more about it, I was deeply intrigued by the work that he did to start that church. And so it became just kind of like this thing that kind of sucked me in, so to speak.
And it's fascinating, and I think the thing about Thurman, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but how, I mean, in some ways, in terms of the civil rights movement, he was very behind the scenes, right? Massive influence on Martin Luther King, but more from a philosophical background. In one of his books, Jesus and the Disinherited, which we did a book study on that here, I mean, back before COVID, but he talks a little bit about his meeting with Gandhi and that. So this sort of quiet, big influence, a seminarian, a professor, an academic, no doubt about that. But then he also does something really practical, like this church plant, because I didn't know about that, the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples. So there's something very sort of striking that's really living it out, right? It's not just theory, it's not just philosophy, it's not just ideology, it's actually trying to live it out. Do you have any sort of reflections or even stories about that experience? I mean, obviously you weren't there, but when that started.
Yeah, I mean, in some real ways, Thurman was a pragmatist in the sense that, like, he didn't just have these ideas that made themselves at home in the academy. Like, he felt the need to actually test them out. So he actually uses that language a lot. Like, he'll say, like, I had to test this out, or I had to experiment. I've heard people writing today referring to his church as a laboratory, because it really became this testing ground for all these ideas that he had. So he really just seemed drawn to ideas. So he had tons of ideas. That's why he wrote so many, one of the reasons he wrote so many books. He had a lot of ideas, but felt the need to test them out. And a lot of them came out of, like, kind of real life experiences that he had. So, like, growing up, so he grew up in Daytona, Florida, and of course born in 1899, so grew up in a deeply segregated time where blacks and whites did not have much interaction with one another. And so from his time as a young boy, he actually had this encounter. He was had a job where he was raking leaves at a white family's home, and the daughter of that family comes up with, like, a straight pin and, like, sticks him with it. And when he kind of cries out in pain, she goes, "That didn't hurt you. Black people don't feel pain." And that was an experience that Thurman writes about in his autobiography. And one of the realizations from an early age was that if we kind of live in separate communities, not only do we lack empathy, but in many ways we make ourselves ignorant about the realities and the experiences of others. So even from that experience as a child, that began to set him on this pathway to go, how can we, and again, not a small thing. I mean, we were stuck by the pen. I don't think we would think it was a small thing, but just an occurrence that happened as a child. I think stuck with him in a way that made him think there has to be a solution for this, and the solution for him was a spiritual solution. And he felt that in some way that if there's a God, that God had to be concerned about these things, and that the church and religious experiences played a role in bridging that divide.
I don't know whether you mentioned this, but so the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples was in San Francisco.
Yep, in San Francisco.
And so in the 40s and succeeding decades, I mean, that was a sort of hotbed of socio-political turmoil, evolution, and I'm interested. You mentioned it was interracial and interfaith. How did the interfaith? I mean, it's one thing trying to get people who would say they're Christians, they're followers of Jesus, sort of, interacting, integrating. But a couple of questions there. One would be the interfaith element. Sort of how did that go? And then also, it became not long after that known as the gay capital of the world, right? So how did that, as that whole thing was going on in San Francisco, did Thurman speak to that kind of thing at all? Obviously, that's been a big part of our journey in terms of LGBTQ inclusion. And anything you could share on that?
Yeah, I think, so for Thurman, and again, a lot of stuff comes from like childhood experiences, but as a child, he had this deep sense that all of life is kind of interconnected and interdependent. And he would carry that out like to all life, not just human life. So even, there's this story of him talking to the trees, which seems like an odd thing to do, but he felt like we were dependent on, yeah, exactly. We're dependent upon nature, and nature's dependent upon us. Our actions affect nature, nature affects us. And so this kind of interdependence, and all that in some way led him to this idea, way of thinking. The phrase he uses is common ground, and that there's this common ground that really connects us all at like if we could get to that deepest level, where we're all really connected and dependent upon one another, regardless of kind of our religious affiliation. That's just kind of manifestations of our maybe beliefs or background or shaping in this world. So beyond this, our religious affiliation, there's this common ground. So trying to get to that, and whereas humans, we're connected and dependent upon one another, regardless of the things in this world that have a tendency to divide us.
Yeah.
And so, he really kind of carried that idea through. And when you carry that idea down to kind of the foundation of it, either one, you have to deny common ground, or you have to say, like, I'm dependent upon this person, but I don't want to live that out. Or you follow it totally out, and then if you follow it out, you become this really inclusive space where we're each dependent upon one another. And then there's something powerful that happens when, again, going back to that empathy story, there's so many people who in our world who fail to understand the experience of LGBTQ people who are part of the LGBTQ community, because they just haven't taken the time to be in a relationship and sit at a table with and to hear the stories, and to allow themselves the space to be empathetic. And for Thurman, empathy played a big role. Empathy and I would say two values that are really important for him: empathy and integrity. And so empathy, this kind of listening and hearing and getting to know, but then integrity is like holding true to these values and beliefs. So if I believe that I'm dependent upon this person, when I hear something from them that I don't like, that kind of repels me, makes me want to build walls. But if I believe truly that I'm dependent upon this person, then integrity means like I have to press into that relationship instead of withdrawing. And so he was always, and in some ways, unpopular in his time. I think Thurman's starting to gain some popularity in our culture today, but at his time, very unpopular because he was pressing into relationships with people who would have been labeled as and actually the oppressor.
Yeah.
He was kind of pressing into those relationships instead of withdrawing from them and being repelled from them.
Yeah.
There was it was the Dean of Chapel back in 2010 at Boston University. He gave a message where this was 2010, he said that Thurman was, see, that's why you shouldn't start quoting people. Basically, he said...
Just make something up.
Basically he said 50 years ago, Thurman was 100 years ahead of his time, which means that at that point, we still had 50 more years to go. So he's like, Thurman's still like some people say like Thurman was ahead of his time and his time, I've been saying this, Thurman was ahead of his time and his time has arrived. This guy was like, Thurman was ahead of his time really hasn't arrived. We're trying to catch up to where he was. Because the community that he formed around himself the kind of inclusivity that we're forming in our world today doesn't, we just aren't there yet. Like in our society, in our culture, in the world that he dreamed of, the world that he pursued, not just within the church, but just kind of in broader society.
Yeah.
I mean, our society is just not there. We're still, in many ways, catching up to these ideas.
And it makes me think, whenever I hear stories like that, it makes you think, like, of all the people even now around the world who are doing an incredible work, thinking incredible things that aren't necessarily even known yet, that we'll say the same thing about, in 50 years' time. But there's, but we just don't see that. I mean, I think that's an encouraging thing, that there's all those things going on. Let's talk a little bit about your time here. And one thing I wanted to share with our community. So Wesley's leaving, in case you didn't know. And I wanted to share a couple of things. One is, I really did my best to persuade him not to go, right? I really tried hard. Without trying to be manipulative, right?
A little manipulation.
We don't have any money left now, by the way. Didn't want you to go. I think I speak on behalf. I know I speak on behalf of the staff of the board and our whole community. But you're still going, we're celebrating with you. And you're a friend, and we'll always be a friend here. There will always be a place for you, and for Kim, especially for Kim.
Especially.
But also, I think when anybody leaves, like we couldn't keep you, right? So whenever anybody leaves, I think we, in a really healthy way, especially as a leadership, and I take ownership of this, have to ask ourselves questions like, because we want to be a multicultural community. We're on our own journey of, which is a different one, obviously, to Seneca Creek. So I just wanted our community to know that we're not just thinking, oh, that's a shame, great, but we're wanting to really look at our own, the areas that we need to grow, the areas that we need to change, and we're taking that very seriously. We're probably not going to get into that publicly on a platform right now, all of those things, but that's something that, as a leadership, we're very serious about. And again, I totally own that, looking at my own leadership and ways that I need to change and grow, especially. But coming back to your time here, tell us a little bit about how has that shaped you? Because really the theme, I think, of this discussion has been the different influences and ways that you've been shaped and that have brought you to this next step. Tell us a little bit about the time here and how that's shaped you.
Yeah, so my kind of, I guess you would say, ministry journey. So most of my life, actually straight out of seminary, this poor little church in rural Georgia hired me as a lead pastor at this little kind of rural Georgia small town church.
And you were about 14 then, right?
Exactly, yeah. I was in my mid-20s, early 20s. So I was a kid, and in many ways, I was a kid in my 20s. I was a kid, and so spent a lot of years kind of in a lead pastor role. I kind of stepped away from ministry, not really because of anything specific, but more to explore other forms of ministry. So I did kind of a more coaching, project management role for helping new churches get started. So I did that for a little while, where I worked with churches all over the country, helping them get started, which was very rewarding and fascinating in some ways to learn about different communities. And then the position I was working before I came here was more in a finance role, where we helped churches buy and build property. So we provided both the funding, but also like construction management, because no pastors have ever taken on a construction project typically. Usually are fairly ignorant. It's not something they teach in seminary, how to build a building or buy a building. And so we worked with pastors all throughout the Northeast, helping them buy, build, renovate spaces. And I've been away from pastoral ministry for almost 5 years when I came here. Which, there were some people that were like, being a pastor or even like standing on a platform like this and communicating, some people would say, it's like riding a bike, you know what I mean? Yeah, I had been away from it for a while. And I would say, I've not been, like I can take some time away from riding a bike and I can get back on and I can feel really comfortable. But in many ways, being away from pastoral ministry and then coming back, I had, different kinds of feelings and nervousness, and in many ways it felt like starting over. And in many ways, standing here and communicating did not feel like riding a bike. It felt a little bit, just uncomfortable in a way that I hadn't experienced.
You did intimate. It didn't come across that way. You did an amazing
job. And that's what I would say is that Cedar Ridge as a community is such a gracious, supportive, encouraging community, and made it easy for me to kind of navigate my way back into ministry as a person that kind of almost felt like, it's with any career, right? You go to school, you prepare for it, you don't know what it's like to actually work that job, and then you get your first job. In ministry, you get your first ministry job and you really don't know what to expect. Maybe sometimes you even do an internship. And I always think there's some churches that are really good for interns. And that's what was my immediate thought about Cedar Ridge. This is a fantastic place for somebody who's an intern, because not every community is as supportive and encouraging as you are. There are some communities that an intern might be a part of and may face critique in a way that does not make them feel encouraged to continue in the ministry. And I would say for this community, I mean, that's definitely a gift of this community. Both a gift that you have, but it was a gift to me to make me feel welcome and included and like I belonged here in a way that I wasn't really anticipating.
That's really good. Really good to hear. Tell us, like, what's one? Because we'll bring things to a close in a second here. What's one challenge, encouragement you'd have for us when you think about the time you spent here and the journey that we're on? I mean, let's just keep it to one.
Can I connect them with specific people?
Yeah. Well, let's go through sections.
Start with this section right here. I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, so like I've referred to the way I think about the church and ministry, particularly in the time that we live in. I refer to it as kind of this, I don't know if this makes sense. Somebody can tell me if it doesn't. But I refer to it as kind of hyper-contextual ministry. So you're really
that doesn't make sense.
Exactly. You're really thinking about the context that you're in. And some of that has to do with in the world that we live in, communities and neighborhoods are not as stable as they used to be. Right? Used to be, you might have, born in a community, you grew up in that community, you didn't hop across the pond, so to speak.
Like some people do.
And some people do. Plant roots in a different community. Now people make multiple moves. Communities are more transient. Communities change. The character, the culture of a community changes. And I think for sure, I mean, right, for this church, when this church started, or at least when it bought this space 25 years ago, or ish, I don't know if my numbers are right, but somewhere around there, this community had to have looked vastly different than it looks now. And I mean, I think my challenge for every church is to think through what it looks like think through afresh what it looks like to do ministry in your community with the changes that have taken place. I work on ideas always in my head, but I worked on this idea of like ministry should be kind of contextualized and always recontextualizing, right? You're always rethinking, because your community is changing. Communities are changing really rapidly, and I think sometimes we don't recognize it when we live there. Is one of the things that church planners do is that when you have a lot of times, so there used to be this thing called parachute drop church planners. Basically, a church planner would like parachute into a community to start a church. That happens a lot less common today than it used to. But that used to be like a model where a planner would like I know people that would look at a map and say, what city do I want to live in? San Diego. I'm going to go plant a church there. And you just kind of pack up and you move there and you build.
It's kind of attractive on days like this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I know some planners have gone, where has the best weather? You know what I mean? Where's the best food? Where's the best, they just pick what they want and they move there to start a church. But when you do that, you really have to work hard to get to know that community and contextualize your ministry. There's some people that really like church plants. They say, well, church plants, I like them because they grow fast, there's some truth to that, right? A lot of times church plants do grow fast, but that's because sometimes there's this work up front of really contextualizing their ministry. There's other factors at play too, so I don't want to just totally oversimplify this. But they do a lot of work of contextualizing their ministry so that what they actually do appears really relevant to the people in their neighborhood or in their community, broader community. But then at some point, and this happened with our church when we planted in Atlanta, is we felt very relevant when we started, and our church grew. But about 5 years in, we looked around and we were like, we kind of settled in to a certain way of doing things. We kind of became protective of those things as well. Yeah. And we were like, we bought a building, we put up the walls, and we became protective. We became aware that we were kind of protecting ourselves from our larger community, which is really we were called to minister to our larger community. But we became very fond of the things that we did.
Yeah, of course.
Because we liked them.
Yeah.
But we weren't thinking about how our community was changing. And even again, we did this kind of reassessment in this 5-year period. And even, you just look at the demographics, just on paper, you're going, this community culturally has to have changed, because on paper, the way it's changed demographically, in ways that we didn't recognize. Yeah. And so I think it's a challenge for all churches.
Well, that's certainly a challenge for us. And as we went through back in the fall, went through our vision series again, sort of looking at our vision through a new lens and realizing our need to change. I think that's a well said challenge for us. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to just wrap up.
Well,
but
I can get chatty. So.
No, it's great. It's great. We'll bring you back again.
All right.
But I just wanted to say thank you so much to you for your time here. It wasn't as long as we wanted it to be, but it's still been a rich time for us as a staff, for us as a whole community. So thank you so much. We wish you all the very best, all the best for that church. I know you wish us the best, and we're all on this journey together. So that won't change. We wanted to pray with you, but we wanted to also pray with Kim. So Kim, I want to invite you up. Let's give Kim a round of applause. And did you want to share a few words, Kim?
Sure. All right, can you hear me? All right, happy Sunday, y'all. All right, so I'm not going to preach, so I'm not going to stay as long as they are. But I just want to say thank you so much for your hospitality. There has not been a week since we've been here where someone hasn't said to us, we're so glad you're here, whether it be to Wesley or to me. And that really, really matters. My hope for you, much of what I have felt, and I've repeated this to our small groups, is that Cedar Ridge is one of those communities that has modeled pretty well that one's belief is not contingent upon one's belovedness, their blessedness, their belonging. Continue to be a community where people are noticed, they're named, they're known, they're nourished. Continue planting seeds of justice. Hopefully by streams of compassion, because there are hard places. We are in some hard times. But flowers can still grow in the midst of concrete, right? Flowers, even some with thorns, can grow in the midst of concrete. There is much work to do. And this work is going to require all of us to do it. And for you, in this time and in this season, you will get weary. There will be times that you're going to throw your hands up. There are going to be times that you really don't even want to engage because it feels like it's too much. I want to encourage you to keep going. Keep loving. Keep cooking. I'm going to tell you, some of the best vegetarian and vegan food I've ever had, has come out of Cedar Ridge. That's a gift. Keep doing that. All right? But I want to leave you with the words that Jesus spoke when he got up in the synagogue. And I hope that it will be both an encouragement and a charge to you. So I hope you receive this. The Spirit of the Lord is upon you, because God has anointed you to bring good news to the poor. And the bringing of that news is also being good news. God has sent you to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. It has been a pleasure. It has been a delight to walk with you. And we all have work to do. And in this season and throughout this part of the journey, I am so glad to say that I did it with you. So friends, you are beloved. You are blessed. You've created a space where one is accepted and can choose to belong. And even when they consider or struggle with belief, they know that this can be called a safe people. Continue to be that. We love you, and I wish you all that God has for you in this season. And again, we're neighbors. So if you need a meal, you want to hang out, hit us up. We're around. Thank you.
Thank you. So, let's leave it there. Okay, so we have a little gift for you both. So we just wanted to give this to you before I invite the board up. And just Ruth and I, as pastors, just want to say thank you. Can't thank you enough. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Kim. And without further ado, I'm going to invite up the board, if you would like to come. And then maybe everybody could just stand, because we're going to pray together, sort of stand in solidarity with a couple that we've grown to love so much. I'm the only one who's actually going to pray, just so this doesn't go too long. But we're all praying with you together and extending our love and our thanks to you both. So, Lord Jesus, we really thank you for Wesley and Kim and their time here. We are so grateful. Thank you for the way they've shaped us and impacted us and encouraged us and challenged us. And we want to receive all of that. Lord, we say again that we want to grow. We want to follow our vision, knowing that that's going to take us into change and discomfort and that realness about following you. So we just want this to be a moment where we recommit ourselves to that. And we pray for them as they take this next step. Transitions are always tricky. And I just pray for peace and a centeredness and a calm as they walk into the new role. Thank you that they have relationships and friendships there already. We just pray that those would blossom and rekindle and that new beautiful ones would form too. Just pray for the church, Seneca Creek, as they go through their own transition. We just pray the very best for them as they move forward with what they're passionate about and what they're called to. And Lord, we just pray for this whole area that is, in some sense, the epitome of so much of the human and social and political upheaval that's going on at the moment. It's so charged here. We just pray that churches like us, churches like Seneca Creek, would stand as beacons of hope and light and peace as we follow you, as we gather others to follow you as well. So we pray the very best for them. With everything we have, we bless Wesley and Kim now. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's give them one last round of applause. Well, not the last one.